One of the key aspects of title inspection is the title search. So, once you have made a decision that you will be investing or buying a property, it is almost mandatory for every investor or a buyer to go through a process of title search. Now, in many Western countries, European countries, and even southern continents like Australia, there are insurance companies which provide title insurance. But in a lot of African countries, Middle Eastern countries, and India, especially subcontinent, there are no insurance companies that will give you a title insurance. So it becomes very, very important that you get professional services which are available locally to do a detailed title investigation or search. So what basically a title investigation does is does a very thorough investigation on every possible encumbrance a title bearer or title transferee is likely to face. So these are usually lawyers or solicitors practicing in every city of the country who have a detailed thorough knowledge of all the legalities, as well as they have a very good portfolio of all or major land parcels within the city who help you do this title investigation. So let us look at what this investigation process looks like. So the first is the title search process, which is a 12-step process. And then there are general requisition, special requisition, additional requisition. There is something called a public notice, and then there is pursuit of documents. So let's look at all this step by step. So first we'll look at the 12 basic steps which are involved in a title search or investigation. So the first thing that a title investigation search it begins with checking the village records, where all the revenue records for land parcels are there, and usually every village has a governing person called Talati. Talati is one of the person which is responsible to make changes in any uh, land transaction that is happening for agricultural land. And so there is something called a 7 form or 12 form. Earlier it was joint called 712 document. Then there is something called a 6 form, then there is an 8 form, and there is a 2 index entry. So his register has 1 to 16 such forms, and for the purpose of title and real estate, we need to check the 7, 12, 6, 8, and 2. Now 7 form usually shows all different records of rights that a person has on the property, and this includes equitable and legal uh, rights that the property would have. Form 12 is more of the form that gives information on the crops and what kind of crops are grown for that particular piece of land. So earlier, because this form was combined, we were checking both 7, 12. Now we don't need to check 12, only form 7 needs to be checked because now they are separated. Form 6 and 8 is a transaction register where any finance is exchanged on a piece of land. These records you will find in 6 and 8 for a given land parcel. And 2 is more of an index entry, which is a summarized entry of any changes taking place here in the form 2. So this is something that you need to check, or the solicitor, your hired solicitation legal firm, will do on your behalf. Now Talati has records up to 10 to 15 years for every single entry on title records of a immovable property, and this is for the office of the Talati in that particular village. So every village in the rural area would have one office where the Talati sits, and that person will have records up to 15 years. Okay, 15 years records prior to 15 years, they are sent to the Mamlatdar's office for archiving. So he will not have records beyond 15 years. So you need to also check the title records with the Mamlatdar if uh, that is not if but definitely after you have checked the initial 15 years record. You need to go back as up to 30 to 40 years for uh, the title search, because you need to go till apparent uh, right to possession part that we had seen in earlier example. So the Mamlatdar would have that, and the title. There is also something called the sub registrar's office, which is in every city, and they have records in the index 1 and index 2. So all the transaction occurring on land in question are usually in index 1 and 2 for the registrar's office. And the registrars, the sub registrar's office also registers all sale deeds, lease deeds, power of attorneys, banakat, that is agreement to sale. And so anything that has happened in the past for that particular piece of land, you will get that information from the sub registrar's office. Then there is something called the city surveyor's office, and the city surveyor's office has all the urban land information for the title. So post TP schemes, so once the town planning schemes have been announced, declared, and after inclusion in the city municipal corporation, property card is issued for every title holder. And property card has information on built up of the property of piece of land. So earlier we saw that if it's an agricultural land, you need to check with the records of talati, mamlatdar, and the collector's office. But once the land is no longer a rural land, it's an urban land where a town planning scheme has been implemented. So once that has happened, you know, do not need to check the records of talati, because once it becomes an urban land, what happens is the local municipal corporation issues something called a property card, which is similar to 712 document. Just the fact that a property card does not reflect anything for agricultural purposes. A property card reflects what is the built up area, what is the carpet area that you're using for the property, and what is the payable tax on that particular property. So your and who is liable to pay the tax. Very similar information as you have in 712 document, where who is liable to pay the revenue to the government for agricultural land. Similar to that, a person who is liable to pay the revenue for the urban use of land is given in the property card. So for that data, you have to look into the city surveyor's office. Then the local municipal corporation or the urban development authority. So in case of Ahmedabad, it would be AMC and ORDA. In case of Gandhinagar, it would be uh, Guda. So every city would have that, and so you need to check that particular authority, especially to check one thing. Firstly, there should not be any dues in property taxes for that particular property in question. Many times a seller comes to you to sell a property, and that property has a lot of lien on it. Lien would be unpaid taxes, and so before you make the final transaction and negotiate the price, you need to do this title search to investigate if any taxes are pending. Secondly, any restriction on any type of development or pending taxes, if any, will also be uh, known once the title search is done here for that particular piece of property. Any reservation as per the zone in the development plan. Many times, if you do not look at the development plan, which we have already studied, sometimes the new development plan may show that property into a reservation zone or an agricultural zone. Earlier, it could have been in a residential zone or a commercial zone. So there would be a change in the use, or there could be some reservation, or there could be some acquisition maybe by that particular planning authority, and so that needs to be checked. Payment on premium FSI or other such as TDR, especially in Mumbai, even now in Ahmedabad. So you need to ensure that a land parcel which you are buying has the available FSI uh, to construct and to make money. So that is very, very crucial. So I'm going to show you one example of one property, and this is a real case. So imagine this is a road, and we have a property here, and this property, this is the property in question, which is being sold, and the buyer of this property, let's call this property A, does a detailed title search for this property, and now this property just has a small residential two-story bungalow situated here, and he is trying to sell this property to someone. In the title search, it was found that, see, just behind this property there is a multi-story residential building. Okay, and what had happened was earlier, so let's call this property B. Earlier, B plus A, this was one single property. And so the owner of A, what he had done was that he had split this property into two separate parcels. So let's say this was 34 by 1 and this was 34 by 2. And so what he had done was that because he was just building a small house here for himself, the FSI available for this entire land plot, FSI as in we refer as FAR, floor area ratio, or FSI, one and the same thing, this was entirely used up here for this entire piece of land. And here he just had shown us a small build up of 220 meters square because he was just building a house. Now when he is selling this to someone, okay, let's say a buyer, a new buyer who is willing to buy this, now he cannot use this FSI of this entire land in entirety here because it's been already used up here. So all he, even after investing in this land, which is right in front of abutting a road, he will not be able to construct any. Even if he demolishes this house, he cannot construct anything more than 220 meters square. So these are some of the smaller details that you will find out only after you investigate into the municipal corporation or urban development authority as to what is the existing FSI situation for a piece of land and whether the land that you are willing to purchase does actually have the allotted FSI available for construction. Moving ahead, there is a town planning office also called Nagarpalika, which has details of all the land deductions. Now, the TP office usually has details about what was the deduction that took place for that piece of land, whether it was 30%, whether it was 35%, 40%. You all know that the final land is called a final plot, FP. And so here you will get details about the original plot boundaries, what was the betterment charge that was payable, and if there was any compensation given, what was it, or if there was any surcharge. And the reason why you need to look at this is because many times the land which is shown on paper may not match with the records of town planning office. There could also be a small dispute which is still not settled, where the new boundary that is earmarked by the town planning office may be very different on paper and in their maps than in actual physical situation on a construction site. So that needs to be looked into, and so this is another aspect in a title search that is investigated. Then there are other search elements. One is the DLR, which is called District Land Records, which has information on all subdivisions of land, if any. So if this particular land was previously subdivided or is being subdivided now while this deal is happening, that information would be with the DLR. Then you also have to look into the local courts, if there is any pending litigation on the property, whether somebody has sued the owner or previous owners for something, because in that case you will not be able to proceed with the intended purpose of this particular purchase. any past litigation and verdicts on this property which may be important. It may have received a verdict that no further construction or nothing, no new development can happen. The reasons could vary. Any verdict could be there, and so because of that, even after purchasing this property, you may or may not be able to use it in the way you want to. So checking the local courts is very, very important. There is something called register of firms, which registers all partnership firms on a property, and you need to ensure that no partnership firm was registered on this particular piece of land, because then that would be a problem, because when the partnership firms dissolves, and if a partnership firm had taken a loan from the bank will seal the property, because if this property is a collateral, there could be a problem in you using it, irrespective of you buying it from one of the partners. So that is another thing you need to look at. And then there is something called register of companies, which registers all private limited and public limited companies, and you want to make sure that no company is having a direct or indirect title claim with the land or property which is being sold, because many times a lot of these companies show one of the land on their portfolio or an asset base, that this is our land, and then they have taken loans from the banks, and when these companies go bankrupt or they have liquidation issues, the liquidator would seal the property. And so if you buy such a property where you have no idea that in past there was some company which was showing this in their assets, you would be in trouble. So that's one thing again that you need to check. uh, Finally, in the title search, you need to also look at register of societies. Now this register is responsible for uh, uh, registering societies and society name, and here we are referring to a society as a cooperative housing society. So many times there could be a previous pending litigation or taxes or liens on a society. So you want to make sure that no society is already registered on this piece of land, because then what would happen is that you will not be able to set up a new society until you have cleared the taxes or any litigation issues that may be there with the society. And then there are others which include trusts. You do want to make sure there was no charitable trust who owned this property, and if it was, you want to make sure that that charitable trust was had permission of the charity commissioner before this property is being sold. Now let's look at some general requisition. So one of the most important general requisition when you're looking at title investigation is will, the inheritance. So there are two specific acts in India which govern will, which we'll look in detail. One is the Hindu Succession Act, and other is the Muslim Succession Act. Both these acts are very different, uh, uh, which deal with the properties, and so you want to ensure that this property was not left to someone through this act of inheritance, because if it was, and if it was disputed property, you will not get these records from the title search. So this you will have to investigate through different means, and so we'll talk about will and what are the different issues that are associated with the property when it comes to will in our next class on types of property transfer. Similarly, there is charge, which is the financial charge that a bank would have as a collateral for the property. And so if a property is mortgaged or someone has taken loan against property, so you would have to ensure that before you go ahead with this transaction or buying this property, you want to make sure what is that charge, because usually mortgage flows with the property, so there won't be any impedance in for you to buy the property, but definitely there will be an impedance when you are trying to use the property. We talked about easement. You want to make sure that all the easements that are provided to the property are being adjusted and continued, or you find a solution to divert them in a different way. And finally, there is rent. You want to make sure what rents are outgoings or incomings on a property. Then there are some special requisition. Now, I'll just talk very specifically something about HUF property. HUF refers to Hindu undivided family. It is an entity, and many times people buy a property on the name of HUF, which is a family property. And so, what happens is that uh, once every child in a family is a major after 18, they are able to have a big stake or big say in HUF property. And so many times, if a property had earlier belonged to HUF or is belonging to HUF which you intend to buy, you have to ensure that all the signatures of all the major members of the property are looked into, because many times there are signatures and some signatures are missing. So that's one thing. There is a family arrangement or inter-family non-formal transfers, and in India especially, you have a lot of properties where either they were given away in dowry or there were some internal family formal adjustment was done. One uncle owed money to some other person, and in return he had given this property, and it was an internal arrangement, and there was no documentation done, and later on they will come running that we have a stake in the property. So that is something you need to know. So again, this would be not available easily, and your legal or solicitation firm will have to look into this and find out through the history of owners as to what kind of arrangements were done. And then there are some additional requisitions. Again, these are very similar to the requisition I mentioned earlier regarding will, because what happens is that earlier, uh, in case of will or inheritance, you could register a will anywhere in one of the four metros like Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, Chennai. So you may be staying in Ahmedabad, and for purpose of security or for the purpose of exclusive secrecy, you might register a will not in Ahmedabad but in courts of Mumbai, Delhi, or Kolkata. So at the registrar's office. So registering a will in different cities would leave you clueless if you have checked all local requisitions, but you don't know if. So you need to also ensure that you have checked all major metropolitan cities whether this particular property in question which you intend to buy does not have a will attached to it. And once this is done, what happens is that your solicitor or the lawyer, the legal firm, will issue a public notice, uh, preferably one notice in a vernacular language, that is a local newspaper, and one would be an English newspaper. And a time of 7 to 14 days would be given to any person who might have any claim in the property. So it would be like a title notice that Mr. So and so is planning to sell his or her land, and we are the legal persons. So if anybody has any claim issue with this sale, should come and meet our office within 7 to 14 days, because after doing all this search and requisition, there still could be something that they might have missed. And so this is one of the mandatory process, that giving a public notice, because if there is any legal dispute happening later on, uh, your legal firm can always say that, look, we had given a notice and nobody showed up, and now that the sale is complete, somebody cannot just come and say that, okay, we have some say in this, because where were you guys when we gave a notice? So it's something for a safety that needs to be done. And finally, it's important to look at the due diligence, that's pursuit of all documents. Detailed study and search is not enough. You need to still look at every possible document that is available in a public domain. and you need to check if this property that you are considering to buy uh, does not have any encumbrance, legal dispute. It has a very good clarity on legal title. It has a very good clarity on equitable rights. It has a very good clarity on who actually has the possession of the property. It has a very good clarity on who has the right to possession, whether there is a mortgage, whether there is a charge on property, whether there are any other planning or financial burden issues on that particular piece of land. So, with this, we conclude our uh, this three-part series on title of immovable property. And if you have any questions, if you have any doubts, we will be having an additional session either on a WhatsApp chat group or through a Zoom interactive, or we can also have a YouTube live stream happening. So you make sure you write down your questions in advance before you uh, participate in that session, because we will be talking for about 30 to 45 minutes and all the students will have certain questions. So we'll look at those questions, and the ones which I will not be able to answer, that could be a situation where because it could be a complex question and I cannot explain it in like one or two lines, I will be recording separate videos of case studies of that those particular questions that you may have, uh, and that too will be shared through this portal. So thank you all, and I'll see you in the next class.